From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. From the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock is featured on this week's cattle market segment. Of course, she'll comment on the sharp downturn in the market last week in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak. Also, K-State's Andrew Curtis talks today about an important development in the battle against anaplasmosis in beef cattle. He and associates here at K-State and Iowa State University have come up with an implant-delivered, slow-release vaccine, which is grading out very well in providing long-lasting protection against this costly disease. Later, Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about 4-H judging training sessions coming up. It's all next on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. And once more, we're glad to have you listening in. For our cattle market insight this week, we turn to the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver. And the director of that center, Katelyn McCullock, for her thoughts on what's going on in the cattle markets. And it's very obvious what's dominant in this trade and just about any other market you can think about, Katelyn. The developments concerning the coronavirus, that's a huge burden on the markets. And this past week, the cattle market more or less in free fall.
Yes, across all the boards, the market is ugly. We have seen lost values in the livestock complex, the stock market. There's just a lot of uncertainty regarding what's going to happen with coronavirus. And I'm sure every day you can check for a new statistic on how many deaths and how many infections. But when you're talking about the second largest economy in the world having such a widespread issue, what things point to, what does that look like for the global economy, how much impact are you going to see in that? And on top of that, we have the African swine flu issue where the U.S. has increased meat production across all the species, gearing up for that. And if you have a slowdown, we're going to end up with a lot of meat on the market. And I think the markets are looking at all of those things and not sure quite how that's going to pan out. So we'll have to wait and see moving forward a little bit. But the market has definitely been beat up over the last week or so.
One has to wonder, because so much of that bearishness was driven by emotional response and worries over coronavirus, whether or not that will cool off and this thing will level out at some point. Do we have any historical context that we can compare to suggest whether that will happen, Katelyn?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor, so in terms of the virus itself, it might be difficult for me to personally assess. But we've had some market drops that have been impacted by, I would consider this a black swan event. It's not necessarily the underlying fundamentals of supply and demand in the meat complex as much as uncertainty over the overall picture. You know, we saw the market react to things like 9/11, the Tyson fire last year, swine flu a couple years back. And so we do have some experience with this. But how quickly the market recovers ultimately is going to be decided by how people feel about the prospects moving forward. And I think until we get some clarity on where the peak of coronavirus is and how many other countries and how many more people are going to be affected, the market's going to be dealing with a lot of volatility moving forward.
In the midst of all of this uncertainty of the past week plus, we look at the cutout values for beef. They seem to be hanging tough, to put it that way.
The cutout might have been the only positive news we saw last week across the beef complex. It climbed 63 cents a hundredweight from the week before, so not necessarily an increase to write home about, but it wasn't moving backwards, which I take as a positive sign. And that might point towards a seasonal rally coming up, but the next few weeks should be very telling moving forward.
You might talk more about that. You have some thoughts on the seasonality of beef cuts in the marketplace, and particularly those primal cuts.
So the cutout typically would rally moving forward from about this time of year into July or so. And some of the reason for that is the change in what's underpinning that cutout value. The typical pattern would be for a rally starting in February and then get progressively higher prices through the middle of summer. Now, just before that rally, though, we do tend to see a dip in that cutout value, which is what I would have said we were experiencing in the last couple of weeks. It is coming a little bit later than normal, but maybe not too far outside that normal pattern. The loin primal has been is usually the primary driver following this similar seasonal pattern for that loin primal value. And it increased $4.94 a hundredweight just this week over last week. That's about a 2% gain. It's also the second highest value primal compared to the rib value. So typically we see the fourth quarter being driven by that rib primal value, and then in the first quarter that loin primal will take over. In the last 5 years, the loin primal typically gains about 67 cents a pound from the February low to the early summer highs. And so we should be expecting a fairly big rally if things follow their normal seasonal pattern. The other two things that tend to increase during the first part of the year are short plates and flank primal values. Last year, short plates increased 16 cents a pound from the lowest point in February towards the lowest point in the first quarter until the peak, and flanks ran up 26 cents per pound in the first half of the year. Now, this week, short plates were down 1.3%, while flank primals were down about 0.5%, so those haven't shown turnaround quite yet. The worry is that if box beef doesn't follow these normal seasonal patterns, that could be pointing to something of much more serious weakness in the overall demand sector. So back to our original conversation about coronavirus and nervousness around that, if we see folks really stay out of this box beef market in the upcoming weeks, then that's probably a more serious demand problem moving forward than a short-term, more of a gut check reaction to just uncertainty. That's when we're really going to start worrying about what does that mean moving forward. Are we going to start building cold storage values of beef and things like that that'll ultimately weigh on the market the rest of the year? But it's too early to say. We're going to watch this number for sure over the next couple of weeks, and over the next 6 months, it should be very telling where we're going to go from here.
You do have some more tangible things we can hang our hat on here. In regard to our feed inputs in cattle production, and we're looking at the crop side now. The USDA came out with its projections on spring planting as it anticipates row crops going in, and this would then parlay into potential feed costs, of course. What are those numbers suggesting, do you think, for the interest of the cattle producer, Katelyn?
So USDA released their first take on planting intentions. So this is well ahead of the March prospective plantings report. This is what was released at the USDA Ag Outlook Forum in February. And they estimated that corn would be 94 million acres, which is up from 89 million acres the year before, and soybean acres expected to increase to 85 million acres, up from 76 million acres the year before. Now, if we think back to last year, prevent plant was an enormous issue. And we saw corn prices rally on the uncertainty of whether that crop would get in the ground. Now, ultimately, when all was said and done, the U.S. lost about 16.7 million acres in principal crops due to fields that were unable to be planted due to high moisture levels, flooding, and lower numbers of field work days. The concern is that even though it's still early this year, when you look at the soil profile in a lot of those same areas, so I'm primarily looking at the Missouri River Basin, the Western Corn Belt, those soil indexes imply that the ground is still saturated, and that during the snow melt, this could become an issue for planting moving forward, whether it's additional flooding or infrastructure damage to levees or waterways that's just going to be unable to absorb even a normal sort of snow melt. And so we don't know quite yet what that looks like. Even if you don't get a lot of rain, there still could be some issues in some key areas. The other big concern is the number of unharvested acres in the Dakotas, and that number is still unknown. So those acres, however many they are, will require a lot more fieldwork days than normal in order to get in those fields, harvest the crop, prepare them for the next planting season, and get that crop in the ground. Now, for those northern states with shorter planting seasons, that makes it a lot less likely corn will be planted unless you have a fairly perfect spring with lots of open field days and the ability to do that. Now, again, we don't know how many acres that is, but those, to me, sounds like conditions that make it less likely corn will be able to possibly reach that 94 million acres. The corn price in Omaha, Nebraska last week was $3.65 per bushel, and that's the lowest price since December of last year. We've had significantly less exports of corn this year. They're down almost 50% on the marketing year. And so we have a lot of corn still on the market, and by our estimate, that 94 million is going to be very difficult to reach, not just because of unharvested acres, it could be because of wet spring, but also I don't think the price is necessarily there to capture as many acres as that's implying. Now, soybeans, on the other hand, those exports are up 15% in this marketing year so far. And the market's seen a small cash rally here in February, and last week we were sitting close to $9 a bushel. And I think that offers a little more flexibility, particularly in northern states. And so I think that soybean number could be a little bit larger than what USDA is predicting. But again, we're very early in making those calls. And so we're going to have to continue to watch the weather and see how everything pans out.
The message then for backgrounders, for cattle finishers, though, is the corn price may be at a relatively low ebb at the moment. There may be some things to suggest that corn acreage will be lower. Would that then say that higher corn prices could be in the offing, or are supplies so plentiful that that corn price and therefore that feed cost would remain suppressed?
I think feed costs will probably be, or at least corn price will probably be below a year ago next year without a significant reduction in those acres. So if you still see something close to 91, 92 million acres, corn price is probably still going to be below a year ago because we're still going to have a fairly heavy carryover unless exports pick up in a tremendous way or we see that usage really soar. It just looks like there's going to be a higher carryout than expected, and that probably we're not going to have the demand there that we maybe thought we did originally. And so if you add on top of that 94 million acres in normal yield, then you're looking at an even lower price.
We appreciate the input as always, Katelyn. Good comments, and we'll talk again quite soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
She's the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center in Denver, which is, again, co-sponsored by K-State and other land-grant universities. That's Katelyn McCullock here on Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. On this segment, we'll report to you an exciting new development which may, in fact, lead to better methods of dealing with a key disease in cattle production here in Kansas and elsewhere. You're familiar with it, producers. It's called anaplasmosis. And the new vaccine approach is the project of our guest now and his team here at Kansas State University in collaboration with Iowa State University. Andrew Curtis is with us. Andrew is a research assistant in the Anatomy and Physiology Department at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. Let's step back and talk about anaplasmosis, Andrew, and the health challenge it poses to cattle producers out there, particularly breeding herds.
That's right. Anaplasmosis is a problem. It's in Kansas. It's in many parts of the Midwest and the southern United States. And what happens is this is a little bacteria, and it actually acts as a parasite in red blood cells in cattle. And so when they parasitize red blood cells, you get something happening called hemolysis. And so you have red blood cells sort of dying off and causing anemia. And so for that reason, animals' packed cell volumes go way down. You get a lot of anemia, lethargy, fatigue. It can result in abortions, jaundice, icterus, things of that nature. And it can cause death. And there are some not very current numbers out there, but the information that's out there right now based on some work in Texas has indicated that this is very costly to producers in the United States. It's probably a low estimate of $300 million a year, and it's a little hard to quantify because there are different things that go into it. Like I said, mainly the abortion angle. When cows are aborting, late in gestation as a result of being ill, that's very costly to producers. It's terribly common worldwide as well. I mean, it's not just the United States. It's in South America and other places. One of the challenges with it is it will go undetected in certain animals, so they can get infected, they can develop symptoms, and if they don't succumb to disease, they appear to recover. Well, looks can be kind of deceiving,
right.
And so even though they look good, they look healthy, they actually can still harbor latent bacteria in their blood. And so these animals have very low, almost immeasurable levels of bacteria still in their blood. And so they themselves may not be able to get reinfected by that same strain. But if a tick or some other vector like a horsefly or maybe a dirty needle were to transfer that blood to a naive animal, then that naive animal is susceptible to disease.
And so that previous animal's a reservoir, basically,
correct.
And that just amplifies the problem.
That's right. And so that's one of the challenges. It's sort of a tricky bug to work with in that regard.
And as we're talking about the bug, you note as well it varies depending upon where you are. Geographically
right.
speaking, it's not the same bug from point A to point B.
That's right. So even if it's in the same genus and species, Anaplasma marginale, there is quite a bit of genetic variation from region to region. And so that makes making a vaccine difficult because you have to incorporate the variants in genetic motifs in these bacteria. And so, I don't want to get too into the weeds with the genetic angle here, but for example, a vaccine developed in, let's say, Louisiana may have some efficacy on anaplasmosis in that area of the country if it's based on antigen derived from that particular strain. But it may not be as effective in other parts of the country. And so that's one challenge that researchers like myself and Dr. Kudsia and folks at Iowa State who we've been working with, that's one challenge we've been dealing with from start to finish on this.
Heretofore, the recommended approach to attempting to control anaplasmosis has been the use of chlorotetracycline, or CTC, as a mineral supplement, correct?
That's right. So chlorotetracycline, aureomycin is maybe not as common as it used to be, but it used to come in 50-pound bags, red and white bags. And you can mix it with feed, you can mix it with mineral. And it was an orally available tetracycline. And so that was one avenue that producers have used historically to treat and prevent disease in their herds. And it was a way to take sort of a metaphylactic approach. One problem with it was that it's hard to dose that correctly when you're feeding things, particularly in a bunk, and more dominant animals will be aggressive and they'll get more chlorotetracycline. So
that's free choice after all.
It's free choice, and so it's hard to control the dosage. So what people concluded was that if certain animals were getting a suboptimal amount of chlorotetracycline, is probably actually contributing to resistance of bacteria, particularly in the gut and in the case of anaplasmosis, potentially anaplasmosis too. So the chlorotetracycline method is now subject to the VFD, the Veterinary Feed Directive, which is a regulatory sort of a prescription. So if you were to go that route as a producer, you would have to consult with your veterinarian, and he or she would have to come out and basically see what we're talking about in terms of your herd, what kind of animals you're dealing with, what sizes, and try to work out how much chlorotetracycline should be delivered. Now, for the time being, injectable tetracycline in the form of oxytetracycline, that is still an avenue for mainly for the treatment of disease. So if an animal comes up sick, you have the veterinarian come out and they determine that it does have pretty high bacteremia and low packed cell volume, they will be treated with oxytetracycline injectable. And that is still available over the counter in Kansas and other places. But
as a treatment, not as a preventative.
That's correct. And so the feeling is that will probably not be the case forever either. And so the vaccine approach, well, our group felt that the time was right to reevaluate the vaccine approach to anaplasmosis.
And you have, in fact, all working together, come up with a novel new idea in administering a vaccine to cattle that may pay dividends in a number of ways. Talk about it, if you would.
Well, we certainly hope so. I'll preface this with saying it's pretty early, but we've had some success, and it's been encouraging. What we've done is we've taken an ear implant, and this is delivered in a way that is similar to growth-promoting implants are delivered, so think of a Ralgrow type product. And an ear implant that can deliver the vaccine over an extended period of time, so you don't have to catch the cattle multiple times to give them boosters. It just sits in the back of the ear subcutaneously. And the study we just wrote up in the Journal of Animal Science, we actually vaccinated these animals 21 months before we challenged them with disease. So we followed these animals for a very long period of time before we even gave them anaplasmosis. The reason we did that was we wanted to see, what's the impact of the stage of life for this animal? Can we vaccinate these animals early in the production cycle, like we normally would in a cow-calf operation, and have a level of protection basically for the effective lifespan of an animal? If an animal is able to be protected for 2 years or more, well, in the beef cattle industry, that's pretty great because those animals are going to go to a feedlot and be slaughtered eventually anyway. So this was encouraging. We were able to protect animals with the vaccine and 2 different adjuvants to make it a little bit more immunogenic. We challenged them with disease. Those animals required significantly fewer doses of tetracycline. In fact, only 33% of them even needed to be treated at all. So only 1/3 of them needed to be treated. Like I said, it's a small sample size, but we validated that the device can stay in the ear for a very long period of time. One thing we were concerned with initially was, will this be an irritant? Will this cause an abscess? Will this result in some sort of local response that we're trying to avoid? We were able to keep them in for a very long period of time without a lot of input on our part. The device we used is very similar to a device the producers may already be familiar with if they're implanting cattle. And so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We just wanted to deliver a new compound in a platform that people are already sort of familiar with.
70% protection, correct?
Yeah, about 67% protection. And to quantify that, what that means is not only did the animals need to be treated much less frequently, so in other words, only 33% of the infected animals required treatment with oxytetracycline, but they also had significantly higher packed cell volumes. And so what that means is they were less anemic, so they were less clinically sick than their counterparts who received vaccine and only 1 adjuvant. And so it's encouraging. We are going to continue with this sort of strategy. So we have more cattle coming. We're going to enroll a larger group for a larger sample size, and we're going to look at different things, including, what if we vaccinate them as a newborn? What if we vaccinate them as a yearling, and see if different life stages have any impact on this at all. And then the next step would be, as I alluded to, the geographic variability. Mm-hmm. We can package different antigens in this. And so if we are able to find one or multiple that are highly conserved across geographic isolates, we can confer protection against anaplasmosis and make I want to sort of steer away from the one-size-fits-all vaccine, but something that confers protection in lots of different parts of the country. We're going to have another study starting in about 6 weeks here at Kansas State.
This idea checks a host of boxes here, and one of those may well be that worry about antimicrobial resistance building up out there.
That's right. And so it's a hot topic. I mean, right. And people are justified in their concern. The era of antibiotics, I'm not going to say it's coming to an end, but we need to be judicious. And when it comes to a bacterial infection that we know can be remediated with vaccine and limit or even eliminate the need for antibiotics in that particular disease, that's something we need to be shooting for.
Great discovery here, and as you continue to refine it, you and those that are working on it with you, Andrew, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for reporting this to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
He is a research assistant in the Anatomy and Physiology Department at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. Andrew Curtis, again, they've been involved in the development and now the testing of a vaccine delivery approach using implants as a protective means against, in this case, anaplasmosis disease in cattle. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll have more after the break over the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128+ people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Again, glad to have you aboard. Eric Atkinson here. Now, today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue reiterated at the Commodity Classic in San Antonio on Friday that the USDA is not crafting a third round of market facilitation program payments and advises farmers to plant for the market He says, quoting here, "We believe we will see prices rise as these commodities start to flow again." Although sales under the Phase 1 trade deal with China have been slow to materialize, National Sorghum Producers Chairman and Kansas producer Dan Atkinson says that the administration has passed a number of trade pacts over the past 3 years, and it is starting to have a positive impact. Now, Perdue added that his Chinese counterparts have been hard at work making the technical changes to the regulations essential to achieving the Phase 1 deal's target. He says he understands many farmers' "I believe it when I see it" attitude, but he said he's giving China the benefit of the doubt. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue is optimistic that the trade deal with China that just went into force will proceed smoothly.
We've got the gift. We've received the gift. We need to unwrap it and make sure it fits and we can wear it in trade. And I think that's where we are on the Phase 1.
He acknowledges there are concerns because of the coronavirus outbreak, but
the hardline numbers that the Chinese negotiated there with unilateral enforcement on our behalf, we think will pay off. The good news about that is at the technical level, they're meeting all the deadlines of erasing some of the problems that have been there underneath the surface. So we feel good about that.
At the same time, USDA has been working to diversify global markets.
That's one of the lessons we learned with the China disruption was that we need to spread our products around. And we've done really a lot of places.
USDA has 7 agricultural trade missions scheduled for 2020. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The Secretary went on to say the USDA is developing a matrix to help the department monitor China's compliance with the deal's parameters. While the coronavirus outbreak has disrupted the flow of goods at Chinese ports, there are signs that it's beginning to reverse directions, according to Perdue. He said he's hopeful that the disruption will be minimal. He said also he expects the next World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report to reflect more of the Phase 1 deal, as well as the coronavirus. And on that score, the USDA is taking measures as part of the agency-wide federal effort to address the threat of coronavirus. With an update on that, the USDA's Rod Bain.
Federal efforts to prevent coronavirus risk from increasing in our nation include an approach Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue calls
all hands on deck. Every federal agency will be involved,
including a White House coronavirus task force chaired by Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar.
The immediate risk to the American public has been and continues to be low.
Yet Secretary Azar acknowledges the need for increased preparedness against the spread of the virus.
The degree of risk has the potential to change quickly, and we can expect to see more cases in the United States.
Secretary Perdue, talking to reporters in San Antonio, Texas Friday, shared some of USDA's current actions in coronavirus prevention efforts.
We've already deployed and detailed people to help out in the areas where they're being repatriated, help those identify quarantine. Our scientists that deal with viruses in an animal way all the time are helping in the research, looking for any kind of possibilities, even vaccines that may be helpful.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And the USDA's Farm Service Agency will be opening up sign-up on March the 23rd for producers to apply for eligible losses of drought and excess moisture under the Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program Plus. The appropriations bill expands WIP Plus to include assistance for crop quality loss. The FSA is gathering data and input from producers and stakeholders regarding the extent and the types of quality loss nationwide. To be eligible, producers must have suffered losses of eligible crops in counties with a presidential emergency disaster declaration or a secretarial disaster designation, primary counties only, for hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, snowstorms, wildfires, and now excessive moisture that occurred in either 2018 or 2019. You can inquire more about this, of course, at your local FSA counter. Next up is this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Winter has begun to loosen its grip here in Kansas, and I spotted some hyacinths and crocus sprouting through the mulch on the south side of my house the other day. Many homeowners are looking forward to a mild spring day to prune shrubs and small trees around their home. This is a pleasant, easy chore for people who like to work in their yards. But did you know that these branch trimmings can also make beautiful bouquets? Branches from fruit trees like apple, cherry, peach, and plum can be placed in a vase of water, and the buds will burst open in about 10 days. Many spring-flowering shrubs can also be used this way, like forsythia, quince, and flowering almond. The florist trade calls these woody cuts or decorative woody florals, and bunches of bright yellow cut forsythia are very commonly sold around Easter. It takes just a little planning ahead to have these bouquets in bloom for a specific day. If your house is very dry inside, you may need to keep the twigs you are forcing in a room with higher humidity, like the bathroom, or keep the vases covered with a plastic dry cleaner's bag until they begin to open. Recut the end of the twigs just before putting them in water, and again when you change the water in about a week. This keeps the xylem tubes open and able to absorb water. If it looks like the blossoms are opening too quickly, simply move the vase to a cool garage or basement to slow down the process. Most shrubs benefit from having several of the older woody canes removed each year to encourage new sprouts to form at the base. This is also a better way of controlling the height of a specimen than repeated shearing just at the top. For older lilacs, this also helps prevent damage from the ash lilac borer, which likes to infest older woody stems of this shrub. These techniques work well for many shrubs with multiple stems that resprout at the base. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, Forest of K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. And ahead of the break, we want to bring to your attention one more time that Cattlemen's Day 2020 at Kansas State University is coming up this Friday, March the 6th, at Weber Hall and Arena on the campus. It is the 107th Cattlemen's Day. The morning program will feature the Vice President of Beef Programs for Select Sires Incorporated, Lorna Marshall. She'll be speaking at 10 o'clock on genetic and reproductive trends in the global beef industry. And then Extension Livestock Specialist out of Oklahoma State University and a frequent guest right here on this broadcast, Darrell Peel, will discuss opportunities for the beef industry in global meat markets. Of course, there's that broad array of workshops and sessions taking place throughout the afternoon of Cattlemen's Day and much more. You can still register, but check it out at ksubeef.org right away, ksubeef.org. We'll be back in a moment. This is Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Welcome back and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Judging within the various project areas of 4-H plays a vital role in helping youth measure their proficiency in those areas and provides feedback on how they can do even better the next time. Judging trainings are being held in late March and early April in southeast Kansas. And Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw says that anyone interested in being a judge for county fairs or project leaders wanting to learn more about what judges look for are encouraged to attend one of several sessions. Beth, a number of judges' trainings are coming up in March and April, and one of the things that we need to talk about is just exactly what goes on during these trainings and who maybe should be interested in getting some of this training. The one March 30th and April 1st and April 2nd, all of those are what are known as kind of a general judges' training?
Yeah, correct. Those are all going to be in the evening. March 30th, we are going to be in Wellington. April 1st will be in Paola, and then April 2nd will be in Chanute. And those trainings will offer some general information about the role of the judge, how to understand your audience when you're serving as a judge, how consultation evaluation works, because that's a little different than maybe some people have been used to, especially if they've only judged open class in the past, because we actually sit down and have a conversation with that 4-H member with their project during most judgings. We will also be talking about using standards and how the Danish system of ribbon placing works and just in general youth recognition. So at each one of those trainings, you'll get that basic information. But then in addition to that, we'll have a couple of sessions where you can actually choose the topic area that you really work on. And those are about an hour and 15 minutes each. So you'll get not only good instruction from a judge's trainer, but probably the opportunity to even maybe practice on some exhibits that get brought in. And the topics for these trainings are all different at each training. So that would be one of the things that people really just want to look online, and it'll be on the State 4-H webpage, to see what's going to be offered at each one.
I think we don't often think about the work that goes into judging these different areas because we see the ribbons at the fair, but we don't always understand maybe how they arrived at that ribbon.
Exactly. And the judging process, I mean, that's such an important part of, a young person, bringing this item and showcasing it there, but then actually getting some additional educational feedback from this subject matter specialist on, how they've done, how they can improve, and so on. And we very much use that experiential learning model where we want that young person to tell us, what have you done? What were the problems that you have? What would you do different in the future? And, one of the questions you asked before was, who might be interested in this? Well, definitely people who want to become a judge for county fairs, but another important audience, I think, is our project leaders, because this is your opportunity to come and learn more about the judging process and then be able to really, help your young people be prepared for that.
There are a number of areas, as you mentioned, arts and crafts, photography, clothing. You'll kind of touch on all of those at the general sessions?
Actually, those will be separate sessions. What the general session is really just going to be about the philosophy of judging. And then everybody will be able to take 2 or 3 sessions that are most of interest to them. So they might be able to take clothing or woodworking or photography or fashion review or space tech, depending on what is offered at each one.
I assume then as you become a judge, then you're probably asked to do this quite often?
Yes, some of our projects, we have a lot of people who judge a lot of different places. And that's another reason why we're holding a judges training, is because we very much would like to get some more people trained up and able to judge at county fairs.
There is another one also April 6th in Iola, and that is going to deal with county fair food judging, and I know that is a wide open area.
Yes, and the foods training, it's a whole separate format because there is just a lot that goes into judging foods and foods preservation. So that date is going to be Monday, April the 6th in Iola. We'll start at 10 in the morning and we'll go until 3. And anybody who knows Karen Blakesley from the K-State campus, she's our trainer today. She's our Rapid Response Center coordinator on campus, and she really does a marvelous job, and she judges foods. She also judges foods preservation, and she's really our go-to person, so we're thrilled to have her as our trainer.
And I know that she tells me she is extremely concerned about food safety, especially when it comes to the judging aspect.
Exactly. And she wants those folks who are judging out there to be able to do that same education with young people. When there's a question about food safety, we want people to understand that and understand how to do it right.
You mentioned the feedback part. Go into a little bit more detail about that. Are they discussing it with them? Are they asking them questions? Or are they just kind of giving them their thoughts, or both?
Oh, it's actually both. It's a two-way conversation. When I judge, I like to have a young person come and start off by telling me about their project and what they did, and I have kind of a series of questions, that I want to know, like, have you done something like this before? What was the easiest part of this? What was the hardest part? What's something that you would do different? Have you repeated this? Is this the first time that you did it? And so it's this back and forth conversation about that project. And then because that judge is a subject matter expert, I think about, my own experience growing up with my knitting judge, let's say. They actually have the item in front of them, and then they can, open that item up and look at it with you, and they can say, do you see this right here? Here's where you had a tension change. In foods, when they slice that bread down the middle, they can say, do you see right here? Here's a hole, and here's why that's there. So not only are they getting feedback from the 4-H member, but it's a real opportunity to do education right then and there about how this item could be improved.
And I imagine that all the information people need is going to be on the website.
It sure is. If you go to the state 4-H website, www.kansas4h.org, under What's Hot, we will have a link where you can click on that and look at the flyers for the different judges trainings, and then also click there and get yourself registered.
That's Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw. Again, for more information about judging trainings in Southeast Kansas, go to kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.